I never imagined that inheriting my grandfather's farmhouse would ignite the kind of war that turns neighbors into enemies and a quiet well into a battlefield. It all began on a warm spring afternoon when I sat in a dimly lit attorney's office, the smell of old paper and lemon polish filling the air. The lawyer, a man with trembling hands and tired eyes, slid a yellowed envelope across the desk. "Your grandfather, Walter Harris, was very specific about this property," he said softly. "He wanted you to have it." Inside, I found a hand-drawn map, its ink slightly faded, outlining 5 acres of land in Willow Creek Estates. My fingers traced the careful lines, pausing on a small circle marked WH. Well. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice again, patient and strong, teaching me how to draw water from that very well when I was 8 years old. The memory hit me like a wave, and I had to blink back tears. He had protected this land for decades, and now it was mine. 2 months later, I arrived with a car full of boxes and a heart full of determination. The farmhouse needed work, peeling paint, creaky floors, wild vines strangling the fence, but the land? The land was magic. The well stood proudly in the side yard, its stone walls weathered but solid, crowned with a wooden roof that sagged slightly but still held fast. My first weekend was spent clearing away stubborn weeds, scrubbing moss from the stones, and repairing that roof, board by board. That Sunday morning, just as the sun warmed the dewy grass, my neighbors David and Sarah Barnes stopped by with a basket of warm blueberry muffins. "We're so glad someone's living here again," Sarah said warmly. "Your grandfather was a wonderful man." "Thank you," I replied, offering them fresh water from the well. First thing I did was test it. Still pure as ever. But David glanced nervously toward the end of the street. "Just so you know, the HOA's gotten stricter lately," he warned. "There's a new board member, really intense about rules." I laughed then, not knowing better. "The HOA doesn't apply to this property. Grandpa made sure of that. I have the original documents." Their relief was palpable, but instead of feeling comforted, I felt the first flicker of unease. Something in David's eyes told me, the fight hadn't even begun. By the second week, life at the farmhouse began to settle into a routine. Morning coffee on the porch, tending the vegetable garden Grandpa once loved, and small chats with neighbors who waved from across the street. But that sense of calm was fragile. It shattered on a cloudy Tuesday when I was pruning the rose bushes near the fence and heard the unmistakable crunch of designer sneakers on gravel. I looked up to find her, Margaret Wilson, standing at the edge of my property line. Her blonde hair was pulled into a painfully tight ponytail, oversized sunglasses shielding eyes that I imagined held little kindness. "You must be Walter's granddaughter," she said without introducing herself. "I'm Margaret Wilson, Vice President of the HOA." I straightened up and tried to keep my tone polite. "Nice to meet you." "Your well is an eyesore," she cut in sharply, her manicured finger stabbing the air toward it. "HOA guidelines require uniform landscaping and approved water features." I kept my voice steady. "This property was established before the HOA existed. It's exempt under grandfathered terms. I have the original paperwork." Her lips pressed into a tight smile. "No property is exempt from maintaining community standards. I've already documented several violations." She pulled out her phone and began snapping photos of my garden, the well, even the clothesline I'd strung between 2 old oak trees. Without another word, she turned and left, her shoes crunching down the driveway with purpose. That night, I received a certified letter listing 3 violations: unapproved exterior features, non-compliant landscaping, and unsafe structures. Each violation carried a $100 daily fine. The next morning, I called the number on the notice and reached Robert Whitaker, the HOA president. He sounded apologetic but hesitant. "Margaret has a lot of influence," he admitted. "If you have documentation, bring it to the next meeting." I spent the rest of the day combing through Grandpa's old oak desk until I found it, a formal agreement from 1982, signed by developers, explicitly stating that my property and the well were historically protected and exempt from all HOA regulations in perpetuity. But Margaret didn't care. Over the next week, she escalated. I began receiving daily violation notices for absurd things. My mailbox flag wasn't HOA approved red, my garden gnome was considered visual clutter, and my flower beds contained colors not listed in the community palette. Then came the drone, a small, buzzing pest hovering over my backyard, taking photos from angles I couldn't have imagined. I caught it on camera, of course, and added it to the growing evidence folder. Neighbors became wary. Some avoided eye contact. Others whispered apologies. One morning, Sarah Barnes stopped by under the guise of returning a baking dish and whispered, "Margaret spreading rumors that you're turning the farmhouse into an Airbnb. That you'll bring down property values." The next day, anonymous notes appeared in mailboxes warning neighbors that supporting me would make them targets of compliance reviews. The community Facebook group erupted with posts questioning my commitment to neighborhood harmony and speculating about the well being condemned by the county. None of it was true. But the lies spread like wildfire. That same week, I found something chilling on my front porch, a dead bird laid carefully beside a note scribbled in sharp, angry handwriting, "Defy the rules, and more will fall." I reported it to Officer Collins, who listened sympathetically but could only advise me to stay vigilant and document everything. Elaine Parker, my attorney, told me to keep calm but prepare. Margaret doesn't just want compliance, Elaine warned. She wants control. I doubled down. I filed for official state historical protection for the well, accelerated by everything happening. I installed additional security cameras, some hidden, some obvious, and kept a daily log with photos and timestamps of every letter, every interaction, and every suspicious car that parked too long across the street. One evening, after Margaret posted yet another neighborhood-wide email suggesting I was endangering children with unsecured hazardous features, I received a strange call from an anonymous number. The voice was low and distorted, but the message was clear: leave, or things will get worse. The final blow came the night before I was due to leave on a week-long business trip. As I double-checked the locks, turned off the lights, and loaded my luggage into the car, I caught sight of two unfamiliar men standing near Margaret's porch, watching me silently. Their presence felt like a promise: she was just getting started. The rain was coming down in sheets as I pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the front yard, illuminating what should have been the well, my well, standing proudly in its place. But instead, my lights caught something gray and unnatural, a dull mass where the well had once been. My stomach twisted. I slammed the car into park and ran out, the cold rain instantly soaking through my jacket. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand as it fell upon the unthinkable. The stone well, carefully preserved by my grandfather for decades, was now sealed shut with a thick, hardened plug of rough concrete. The wooden roof I'd repaired with care was shattered, pieces scattered like broken bones in the mud. A motion sensor light flicked on next door. Margaret stood on her porch, arms folded, wearing a pristine white bathrobe. Even from this distance, I could see the smug curve of her lips. I stormed toward her house, fists clenched at my sides. "What did you do to my well?" I demanded, my voice hoarse from rage and disbelief. "The board voted," she called back calmly, her tone syrupy and insincere. "That dangerous hole needed to be addressed for community safety. You should have complied with the notices. You had no right. That well was exempt from your rules." She disappeared into her house for a moment, returning with a folder of neatly arranged papers. "Emergency Action Provision, Section 8.3, she read out loud. "When a hazardous condition presents immediate risk, the board may take corrective measures." Her eyes glittered with malice. "We sent you multiple notices. Your continued non-compliance forced our hand. I stood there, rain pouring down my face, my hands shaking with fury. I was gone for 1 week. Which demonstrated your inability to maintain a dangerous feature, she said sweetly. A child could have fallen in. It's late. Any further concerns can be addressed at the next board meeting. Her door closed in my face. I called Officer Collins, standing there in the rain, trying to steady my breathing as I explained what had happened. He arrived quickly, his face sympathetic but his hands tied. I'm sorry, Emily. This is a civil matter between you and the HOA. You'll need to handle it in court. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table, soaked to the skin, reviewing the security footage I'd captured while I was away. My heart dropped when I saw it, clear as day, Margaret standing in my yard the morning after I left, waving her hand to direct a concrete truck onto my property. The driver looked hesitant, but Margaret flashed a sheaf of papers, pointing authoritatively at the well. 2 workers poured concrete straight down into my water source, with Margaret standing over them like a queen watching loyal subjects execute her command. The next morning, I pounded on Robert Whitaker's door. He opened it, eyes bleary with exhaustion. When I showed him the footage, he paled. I didn't know, he stammered. She told us there would be a temporary safety cover installed, nothing permanent. She destroyed my water source, I said through gritted teeth. Robert swallowed hard. The paperwork she showed us didn't mention concrete. She lied to the board. I drove straight to Elaine's office. She watched the footage, her jaw tightening. This isn't just HOA overreach, she said. This is criminal vandalism of a protected historical site. There's more. She pulled out a law book, her finger tapping a highlighted paragraph. Your deed includes riparian water rights. Those override HOA authority. My head spun. She didn't just cross the line, Emily. She jumped over it with both feet. We're filing today. Later that afternoon, 4 neighbors appeared at my doorstep. Eleanor Price spoke first. We saw what she did, Emily. We're with you. The Petersons handed me photos of Margaret measuring the well the day before the concrete truck arrived. Franklin Webb, soft-spoken and gentle, said he'd overheard her on the phone arranging the delivery. Sarah Barnes added quietly, she told the workers they were doing emergency HOA maintenance. I thanked them, fighting back tears. We filed the lawsuit that night, naming both Margaret and the HOA. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Robert, his voice tight with anxiety. Several board members want to talk. Margaret showed us forged paperwork. We never authorized this. Before I could respond, a brick shattered my living room window, the glass exploding inward. Attached was a note scrawled in jagged letters, "Drop the lawsuit or worse will happen." This wasn't just a fight over property anymore. It was war. The brick shattered more than just my window, it shattered any illusion that this was still just a petty neighborhood dispute. The note attached was crude, but the message was chillingly clear, drop the lawsuit or worse will happen. The wind whistled through the broken glass as I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the jagged letters. I took a photo and called Officer Collins, who arrived within minutes. His demeanor had shifted, now this was no longer a civil matter. He carefully placed the note into an evidence bag, his brow furrowed with concern. Be careful, Emily. I don't think she's going to stop. The next morning, it became even more obvious just how far Margaret was willing to go. Bright yellow flyers blanketed every mailbox in Willow Creek Estates. The headline screamed, Emergency HOA Meeting, Community at Risk from Irresponsible Resident. The lies printed beneath were infuriating. Margaret accused me of falsifying historical documents, claimed my well had already decreased property values by 15%, and suggested I was endangering local children by refusing to comply with safety directives. By noon, small signs had appeared in my front yard, each one crueler than the last, comply or leave. wells kill property values. Community before selfishness. Across the street, a group of Margaret's loyal supporters stood with their arms crossed, watching, waiting for me to snap. But I didn't. I calmly photographed each sign and added the images to my ever-growing evidence folder. Later that evening, there was a knock at my back door. It was Clara Bennett, my elderly neighbor who had rarely ventured out since Margaret forced her to remove her late husband's rose garden. Her voice trembled. "I shouldn't be here, but you need to know, Margaret's meeting with her closest supporters tonight. She's telling them you threatened her. She's also trying to get your historical designation revoked. And Emily, be careful with Max." I bolted for the backyard, my heart sinking. Max's gate was latched, but he was gone. Panic seized me as I called his name into the night, my voice breaking. Hours passed. No sign of him. Just before midnight, a text came from the Petersons, "Check Margaret's shed. We saw her dragging something there earlier." I called Officer Collins again. He met me at Margaret's driveway. When she opened the door in her silk robe, feigning sleepiness, her mascara still flawless, she protested loudly. "This is harassment." But Collins was firm. "We have cause." When he opened her backyard shed, Max bolted out, his tail between his legs, dehydrated but safe. Margaret's explanation was as shallow as her concern. "He was digging in my yard. I was going to call animal control." The neighborhood murmurs turned into outrage overnight. The security footage from the Petersons' cameras, showing Margaret luring Max with treats, then carrying him to the shed, spread like wildfire. Still, Margaret wasn't done. The emergency HOA meeting she had orchestrated became a turning point. The community center was packed, tension crackling in the air. Margaret took the podium first, her voice syrupy sweet but her words venomous. She displayed blown-up photos of the well, calling it a danger and a blight. Her speech turned theatrical, warning that my lawsuit was an attack on every homeowner's security. When it was my turn, I didn't retaliate. I simply presented the historical registration documents, the property covenants, and photos of similar features in other prestigious neighborhoods. I ended by saying, "This isn't about defiance. It's about preserving history while respecting community standards." Then Robert Whitaker stood, holding two documents side by side. "The board never approved filling the well with concrete," he said, his voice loud and clear. "These signatures were altered." Gasps filled the room. Margaret's smile faltered, her hand trembling as she lunged for the papers. But Robert stepped back. "The HOA is severing all ties with Margaret Wilson," he continued. "We're supporting the restoration of the well and covering the cost through our reserve fund." Margaret's face flushed an ugly shade of red. As she stormed down the aisle past me, she hissed, "Your grandfather wasn't who you think. Ask about the Henderson deal. This isn't over." And just when I thought it couldn't escalate further, I discovered my brake lines had been cut. The discovery that someone had tampered with my brake lines was the final crack in the dam. Officer Collins arrived again, this time with detectives in tow. The fluid was still dripping beneath my car, evidence fresh and undeniable. The threat Margaret posed was no longer just about control or power, it had become life-threatening. My upcoming court hearing was just 2 days away, and I knew now there was nothing Margaret wouldn't do to silence me. But I wasn't backing down. Her cryptic words at the HOA meeting haunted me, "Ask about the Henderson deal." The name Henderson meant nothing to me, but it gnawed at the edges of my mind. I spent sleepless nights poring over my grandfather's papers until, one rainy afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Through the peephole stood an elderly man, cane in hand, his face lined but kind. "My name is Frank Henderson," he said when I cautiously opened the door. "I believe Margaret mentioned my family to you." Over steaming cups of coffee at my kitchen table, Frank told me everything. In 1976, during a brutal drought, Margaret's father, then a powerful local banker, attempted to seize the Henderson family farm through fraudulent loans and shady contracts. My grandfather, Walter Harris, had privately loaned Frank the money to keep his land. But in exchange for staying silent about the banker's criminal activity, my grandfather extracted covenants that protected natural features and water rights on properties his bank attempted to seize. Margaret's vendetta, it turned out, wasn't about community standards. It was generational revenge. The next morning, restoration crews began removing the concrete from my well. Midway through the process, they uncovered a small, waterproof metal box hidden in a cavity within the well's stone structure. Inside were the original bank records, contracts, and photographs documenting the illegal activities of Margaret's father, and covenants requiring preservation of natural features. Violating those terms, it turned out, invalidated the very property deeds Margaret claimed as her own. We returned to court with the new evidence. Margaret sat hollow-eyed as Elaine presented the documents, each one sealing her fate. Judge Reynolds ruled that not only was Margaret guilty of criminal vandalism, fraud, and endangerment, but her property ownership was nullified by the breached covenants. She was ordered to vacate her home within 30 days and sentenced to community service cataloging historical landmarks, the ultimate irony. The HOA dissolved shortly after, replaced by a neighborhood heritage committee dedicated to preserving, not destroying, history. On the day the well was fully restored and pumped fresh, clear water once again, neighbors gathered in the yard, no longer divided by fear but united by relief. Robert handed me an envelope they'd found taped behind the old HOA charter. Inside was a letter from my grandfather. Water brings life, but it also reveals truth. Protect what matters, not what merely appears proper. I often find myself standing by that well, thinking of all that was buried, both in the earth and in hearts. Justice, like water, may be forced underground for a time, but it always finds a way to rise again. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.